you should think about AI in hours worked. Not hours worked as you putting in the hours and skipping family dinners because you're still at the office. Rather, how many hours can AI work on your behalf? And the only way to get there is to automate something, because that's the only way to get work done while you're not at the keyboard.
Welcome to Building Agentic Experiences, the podcast where we dig into what it actually takes to build AI that doesn't just assist, but acts. I'm Tapio Haaja, Chief Commercial Officer of Intentface.
I'm Joni Juup, one of the founders and the Chief Design Officer at Intentface, also the design engineer.
Together, we bring you conversations with founders, product leaders, and others building this stuff for real. Not in theory, not in demos, in production. And today we got a great one. Our guest is Tuomas Rinta, founder and CEO of Luo. Tuomas has spent over a decade in Silicon Valley tech leadership, engineering roles at Unity and Handshake, most recently CEO of Noise. Here's why we wanted Tuomas on right now. With Luo, he's building an AI agent platform for the 99% of knowledge workers who see the AI hype but don't know where to start. And he's got a very deliberate take on trust, guardrails, and how an agent should actually talk to people. That's exactly what we want to unpack. Welcome, Tuomas.
Thanks, Tapio.
Did we miss something?
No. I'm just happy to be here. Of course, with an intro like that, I'm a little unnerved. You're painting a pretty cool picture. I want to meet that guy.
A little bit about vocabulary. Like, we have all used chatbots that just talk, but what does it actually mean for you to AI become an agent that does things?
That's a great question. I mean, honestly, that's also the hard one, because if we think about the transition a lot of people are going right now, knowledge workers, the transition from asking and getting answers to getting things done, I think is the biggest challenge. And this is also how I define agents, because to me, they are manifestations of AI that do work for me, on behalf of me, and more without me having to intervene after I tell them what to do. And that's, I'd say, the main distinction there.
By the way, what was like personally the aha moment for you that this changes everything?
I'd have to say it started with the first GPTs coming out and kind of going in and saying like, oh, this is kind of interesting. I worked but with AI folks for a very long time before it was called AI, when it was just like machine learning. And there was a clear click in my head when I saw the conversational interfaces and things like that. And that's when I was truly intrigued. And when these things got tools and started doing things and writing code, that was this moment where I had to stop and go like, this is going to change so much, but also realizing how incredibly early we are in this journey right now.
Okay, let's go to Luo. So what was the key insight that led to the creation of Luo?
Really, for us, it comes down to thinking about what does the workforce need. And we spent a lot of time with the team last year thinking about what do we want to build specifically, because building in AI can be so many things, and startups are successful when they're very focused. And in this space, it's very easy to, not be focused. Let's put it that way. So we actually first, when we started building Luo, wanted more to go after the segment that Lovables and Replits and others are doing. And especially at that point, there was a lot of stumbling happening in the tooling. Things weren't very secure. It was hard to get things built. And of course, they've gotten considerably better since then. But we had this idea of how we could do it differently that would build more reliable software. But at the end of the day, we didn't feel like it's the right target market. We didn't feel like these indie builders and entrepreneurs are the ones that are going to propel us to be a massively successful company. I mean, Lovable is, And I'm not sure we wanted to go in competition with them given how amazing their growth has been. But also it forced us to think that what do we believe is the true transformational tooling that's required for knowledge workers to adopt AI. And this is kind of the point where Luo started forming, where we started thinking about it as like, what does work look like 5 years from now? How do we do it? How do we think about preparing for it? What are the foundations of it? And thinking of all of that reminded me of a stupid story that I do have to tell. I'm sorry. It goes back to, I think, 97 or 98, when I wanted to start building software for real. I was just graduating high school and I was thinking about life after that. And I liked the concept of making money. So I needed to take my hobby and go a little further. And I got this book. It was To Teach Myself Perl. And for those of you who are listening who are not as old as me, Perl is a programming language that is even older than I am, probably. And in the introduction, the author wrote that the best software engineers are lazy. And I was like, oh, what is this? And he explains it and he says, they automate things so they don't have to do it again. And I was like, oh, yeah, I can get behind that because I will happily spend 2 hours automating something that saves me 15 minutes now because it's compelling. But I remember that moment when we were talking about Luo and thinking about, what do I want to do with these things? How would I want to work if I have AI? And I realized that laziness is a virtue because now with AI, we can get people into that mindset, like across the board, because AI can be the tool that helps them automate things, get things done, so they don't have to do those things that they go, oh, I have to do that thing again, because it doesn't necessarily add value. They can focus on the interesting things, the hard things. And this is what we're trying to unlock. How do we get everybody to be like the guy who wrote that book, who said laziness is a virtue because then you try to automate the things you don't want to do again. This is really what I'm building for, which isn't necessarily the coolest way to describe it because laziness isn't really a selling point. But it is that mindset of how do we get more done without us humans having to put in further effort, because there I believe the future truly lies.
Yeah, and product design wise, I think I heard this somewhere, I forget the source, I'm sorry, but somebody said that when you're building a solution and if you're removing a barrier or making it easy for a person to sort of get their task done, something that they really have to do, something they can't get around it. And if you can remove those blocks and makes it easier, then you basically have a good solution in your hands. So this sounds a lot like removing barriers and making things like more fluent for anyone.
And I think that's a really great point because it is a barrier right now. For a lot of people out there, AI is a promise, it is excitement, but for truly it to provide value, there are still multiple barriers for most people. Some of them are still inherently technology-based. We still struggle with things like LLM hallucinations. We struggle with things that LLMs don't have persistent memory, and therefore we need to do context engineering and things like these. And for many people, these are insurmountable tasks because they don't come from the background that is required to build in AI. Sometimes I, as a software engineer, still have to stop myself and think like, okay, how would I solve this problem? And I've been building software for almost 30 years professionally. Now, imagine somebody who doesn't have that background trying to build something. So the barriers are vast, but I do think that right now, especially with the introduction of some of the latest models, Anthropic's Claude, Opus 4.6 and things, it's shifting all the time. The capabilities are getting better. However, I firmly believe, which you as a design person probably love, is that it is often much less about the capabilities of the model, rather how we design those experiences for people to consume and get the benefit of.
And this is good bridge to talk more about agentic experiences and what are good agentic experiences. Like I said, and I think I noticed you have built sales agent called Roy Batty. And if I understood correctly, you are building Luo for, how would you say, average knowledge workers. So they like normal people, normal knowledge workers, so they are able to build their own agents and use them, not like engineers.
Yes.
Yes. And so I'm just curious, because why did you build agent that has like persona and is named by, do you have what's the idea behind that?
So at the end of the day, if we look at the manifestation of the most popular AI technology right now, the large language models, the LLMs, they are trained on human communication. That is why they speak to us well, is because that's how they were trained to work. Now, I think there's a good outcome from that, because we don't have to teach people how to interact with this new technology, because this new technology is taught to interact with us. This is why chatbots are so popular, because you don't have to think how you change your experience. How do you learn this new technology paradigm to use this new tech that has been put out there? Rather, it is the thing that you already know to do, which is talk to other people. Disclaimer, not everybody still masters that either, but hey, we can always hope. But when we then think about these things and why we made Roy Batty feel human, however, always disclose that he is an AI, is because we give people a natural interface through that. They know how to interface with that. They know how to interface with a human. They know how to interface with communication, sending emails, things like that. So we model after that because that is natural.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just going like even more to the future, thinking like when you're hiring people, there are many people who might have same capabilities, but maybe the cultural fit is not that correct. Are we talking soon about cultural fit of agents? How they, I don't know.
I think maybe one point that I want to sort of grasp in this as well is that when you're building this like a natural language user interfaces, it's quite natural to use them. But I think one problem, probably what you have faced as well, is that people don't yet know what they can do with it. So they have this sort of like empty page problem, and it's not difficult, but it's a design challenge to build the affordances that really gives you the sort of ideas that what you can accomplish on this platform. And I think we as users, we are constantly learning, and people en masse are sort of getting to understand what is even possible. But is this something that you've been struggling with, or how are you solving that?
So let's put it this way. The empty page problem is real. It is so very real. And you'd imagine that people, when given the power to do anything, they could do anything, yet most of the time they actually do nothing. And it's not because people don't necessarily have the capacity to figure out the problems or things like that. They don't know how to get started, because while they're talking to another person, the skill required to actually build something with AI is a skill most people don't have to learn on their job, because it is that system thinking, it is those processes. And even though we describe them in natural language, the reality is that the code in engineering was never really the bottleneck or the hard problem. It was always really figuring out what's worth building. And when we give the access to these to everybody, they're realizing that they might not know what is worth building, or how should I even describe it? Because it's easy to say like, well, yes, I would like to have an AI agent that does sales for me. That's a very vague thing, and the LLM is going to do terribly with that guidance. So then we stop people and say like, okay, how do you break that down into something more manageable? And they're like, it should like sell a product and send an email. And we're like, no, this is not what we mean. And the most common example that we've describe to people is think about the AI as an entry-level employee you've just hired off the street. They've just graduated. They are full of energy and want to go as fast as they can, which AI usually does when you let it loose. But they don't really know anything about your job, your tasks and things like that. They have the theoretical knowledge of a graduated student, and dumb it down for them. Explain to them what the job is, and it's like, okay, you're now going to come in, and here's your job. Here's your lead list. Start every morning, take the top one, draft an email, and remember, then you should probably think about who you are emailing. And people are like, yeah, I know how to do that. I'm like, well, do that. Just explain that to the AI. And they're like, oh, now it makes sense. But that's a shift people struggle to make right now with using these tools, because to them, this is not how they have worked with computers and technology systems. But they know kind of these things that they need to do, but they can't connect the dots yet. And this is where we need to help them and design these systems in a way that pull them in, give them the structure they need for them to be successful. And again, it comes back really into, it's not about the underlying models and technology, it is about the design and the experience, that how people go through the process and learn the capabilities and learn how they can get to their outcomes better with the help of AI, because we now have this capability.
Yeah, I think that is something that we aren't like, we haven't used to sort of documenting our thought processes in that way. So that this is a sort of like a new skill that people need to adapt and sort of like meta think about what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, how do I describe what I'm doing. It's not like, not many people know how to do this like instinctively, I think.
Absolutely, and I think that's a part of it. And I'll go as far as say that there's a world where they don't necessarily have to learn to do that meta thinking, because there are so many things we can build to give that structure. And the way we are, for example, approaching it now is we're kind of flipping the script of, instead of bringing users into Luo and saying like, okay, what do you want to build? Saying like, okay, we give them these templates, and then you start building stuff, and it flips it around. So it's more like an interview where the AI interviews the person. And there's a very specific reason we do that. And we want to do it once, because when we do it for people once and they see the outcome, what usually happens is then they go and say like, well, okay, now I can tweak this one thing. And that's when the magic happens. Then they're like, oh, and this is how it works. Now they suddenly can go and do the same thing again without us needing to hold their hand. But this first process, we have to walk them through it. And again, AI is great at interviewing people. We give it a large amount of context and a certain structure for this onboarding interview, as we call it, for the purpose of helping people understand what information do we need to give to the AI so it can do the thing that I want.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like I consider my semi-advanced AI user and knowledge worker, and for example, for me, creating skills straight is quite hard, but making it through interview kind of with Claude, it's actually quite easy. Like I think that's a good approach. Let's go to a little bit talk about trust. So I think trust is big. I wouldn't say issue, but the thing when you start using agents. So how do you convince a user to let an AI handle something high stakes for the first time, like sending an email, for example?
Yeah, I mean, we get that question a lot. And if people don't ask it, I tell them they should probably ask it. And I want to be completely upfront that, hey, this is new territory and it's not going to be perfect. And we have to understand the tools and capabilities before we can safely use it. But of course, we've invested considerable amount of time on Luo, for example, to make sure that there is very little risk to the users. However, like any system, it is reliant on the guidance you give it. If you skip over giving it the right guidance, you're going to get not such great results. I mean, garbage in, garbage out. So what I tell people to do is what I have been doing as well for quite some time, and literally how I built our AI sales agent, Roy Batty, is I defined the skills, I defined how I wanted to craft emails, and then I did not let it send emails. Rather, I told it to draft emails. I told it to send emails to me first. And the key part of that was not necessarily trusting it or lack of thereof or worrying it's going to go haywire. Rather, I wanted to make sure that it gets it right. And I've conveyed myself clearly enough so that Roy actually understands what I want, which in hindsight was a good approach because I did spend a bunch of hours creating these test emails and going like, actually, no, let's change the tone. Let's not do this. Oh, now it's too long. Now it's too short. Now the main point is missing. Now, the key here, of course, is we want this to happen in a product where the feedback loop can be really, really short. And this is what we've put a lot of effort into is it was literally back and forth, like, no, do this change and update skills, send me an email. And each iteration was like 1 minute. But even still, I wanted to do it because I wanted to sure that it goes right. No, so then I got my skills up and running. I feel confident on the email, up and at him, let it go. Did I let it respond after that automatically? No. So the same thing after that is I see responses to Roy's outreach come in, and I go and log into Luo and saying like, okay, let's scan replies, but please do not send email to customer. Let me review it first. Same iteration. So there are, of course, inherent risks that are real in AI platforms, and we've spent a lot of time on Luo making sure that those don't materialize for our customers, like prompt injections and things like that. But honestly, a bigger part is how you use the system and what kind of missteps you may have because you don't think about what you're instructing AI to do. So that's where I would say like the biggest amount of time needs to go into so you feel that you can trust how you designed these things. And we, again, want to help and we want to guide, but what we cannot help with is a user going like, yeah, whatever, answer something. I'm like, don't do that. Like you're not going to like what happens.
Yeah. And like you said, it's like a junior person that you just hired in and you're trying to teach. So you don't put those like, go to the client's office and just, do whatever. Because you want to see how they behave, how they work. So it's a trust building exercise.
It is. And even at that point, it goes back into the age-old saying of trust but verify, which is after you've gained that trust, you need to make sure that you have the ability to go and verify afterwards. Like for us, when we build these agentic workspaces on Luo, we always build this thing, what we call the playground for the agent, which is it serves the purpose of allowing the agent to store information around what it did, the decisions it made, stuff that doesn't necessarily need to go into a CRM. But it's also the place where we go look at what it's doing. It is the track record, so we can go like, hey, actually, I noticed this one. Please give me the rationale around why you did this email this way. I get an answer back from the agent, and I'm like, okay, yes, kinda, but let's tune. So this verification needs to be there so we can go in and fine-tune afterwards. And if we don't have eyes on the agent, well, then we don't know what's happening.
Yeah. And adding tools to an AI, you also need to make sure that the tools that you give them don't give the opportunity to do anything destructive, basically. So always have this sort of like rights handling or the permission handling in place.
Yes, of course. And we have that as well. And it always starts with like default block and ask for a user to come in. And then for agentic experiences, we have indeed a tool which we call innovatively enough tool guard. Yay. And it's what we call the handbrake. And it's even if the user says always allow for certain type of actions, which is kind of necessary. If you have any agent that's tasked to send emails, yes, it kind of needs to always, when it's executing, be able to send emails. Otherwise, what's the point? But then there's the handbrake that says, you know what, the user said always allow, but we saw something that says, no, we're now going to pull a human in and verify that this isn't something that's malicious. And then an email goes out and says, Luo needs your help. Please come in and review this action because we want to verify that it's doing what you expected it to do. So all of these things are things that need absolutely be thought out, and whether it be destructive tools, but also then when we design these systems is clear context into how to use these tools. Because the joke I make around these is you've all probably seen the internet stuff going around when Anthropic releases Claude model cards, and then there's these adversarial scenarios of like, oh, Claude tried to blackmail the testers and stuff like that. And people are like, oh no, it's Skynet. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's still not sentient. But that doesn't mean it can't be dangerous, because the highest likelihood of something going wrong is an AI going like, you're absolutely right. I shouldn't have launched that nuclear strike without asking you first. Let me do that better next time. And we're like, no. So it is really about what tools with what guidance into what context. And that is the combination that we must know how these need to be combined so we can control the outcomes of it. Because this is what it really comes down into is AI works the best and safest with high amounts of constraints. And if we don't have these constraints, outcomes are unknown. And most people, and especially compliance lawyers, don't like unknown outcomes. So we should figure out how do we give the agent enough room to be innovative in the task it's trying to do, but within a safe, bounded context.
I just read an interview from Daniele Amodei, co-founder of Anthropic, and she said that she doesn't see many activities where AI can work fully autonomous. So she believes that you actually need to have a human in the loop in many cases. And I think we haven't yet seen what's the best user experience to having human in the loop. At least for me personally, it just doesn't make sense to be clicking allo all the time. So do you have any ideas how we should build this human in the loop UX?
That's a great question. And honestly, yes, it is a little bit of a open question still, and there's been some iterations of that. And of course, the massively popular and hyped open source tool OpenClaw took a stab at that, where essentially your interface is WhatsApp or iMessage. And it feels good in a sense, because again, it goes back into what is a natural interaction for us. But really at Luo as well, we are building this AI worker / AI agent home for you, where when these workers, we are often calling them AI workers instead of AI agents, when they work, how do they talk back to you is actually a very active project for us. Where do I go in to talk to Roy and to talk to Rochelle, our CSM agent, and where do I figure out how they're doing? What questions do they have for me? And it's going to take time for us to figure out how that feels natural. And funnily enough, at the same time, we're experimenting with voice communication as well, because I like to talk. I don't know if anybody has noticed, but it goes back into that natural communication method for us. So really kind of summarizing it is, there needs to be a place for you to do that in your systems or platforms like Luo. But also then, what does that communication feel like? How do you experience it? How do you work with AI workers that are essentially extension of you, because you created them for tasks that you don't want to do or you don't have time for? And what's that like? And even to that, then the question is that when we go human in the loop, how do we want the agents to talk to us? And should they have personas? Should they have tones of voice, distinct personalities? And again, there's a lot of anthropomorphizing going on with people giving them very human-like qualities, and again, making maybe the comments that they're sentient. But I believe there's a valid reason for that, because psychologically, we think of those conversations as conversations with other humans. And there's an uncanny valley moment when you are talking to a faceless robot, essentially. So we want to reduce the psychological burden from people when we're talking to these things, when we're having these human-in-the-loop moments, by giving them something you can relate to. Because that reduces that friction of having a social interaction that feels a little bit unnatural. So while I do think the human-in-the-loop is truly important, because like her, I do agree that 100% autonomy is probably a futile task right now. But the user experience from how do I see it, which button do I click, is a part of it. And the part of it is, what does this actual social interfacing between us and the agents look and feel like?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Like in some use cases, it might make sense to make the agent quite like non-persona, basically. So when it's doing tasks and for example, Claude Code is quite neutral. It doesn't have a lot of it's not poking funny jokes at you because you're just doing a task. But then when you're doing certain type of things, it's more natural to speak with something with persona and what vocabulary it uses. Is it like professional terms? Is it like more approachable? Like calibrating those it's not an easy task, and it requires quite a lot of iteration. Do you do that with your onboarding? Are you figuring out what kind of person you're talking with, or are there any guidelines how you're thinking about it?
So, I mean, again, these are very much greenfield things, not only for us, but even in the industry. My personal take on this is that we're not going to be able to build guardrails or templates or things like that will appeal to everybody. Rather, we want to figure out how over time the personas that form a person's AI worker team reflect the communication method and personality of the person managing them. So I earlier already said this, that I believe that sometimes these AI agents are an extension of you, and I really do mean that. And it is almost like you're building digital clones of yourself to do certain biddings that you don't want to do. And although I'm not 100% sure that I want to talk to clones of myself, because sometimes having teenage kids reminds me that that's not always the most fun thing. I love them dearly, but yes, any of the listeners who have teenage kids will know what I'm talking about. But the reality is that personalities are so incredibly subjective that we shouldn't necessarily try and guide them, rather let them mold those workers to what they should be like. And again, we're blurring the line of what does this mean? What is identity? And then, of course, the fun question of if you build these digital clones and their representation of yourself, who actually owns them afterwards?
Yeah, true.
One question about positioning, because I guess many listeners might be now thinking, but hey, Claude Cowork is already this kind of agentic orchestration platform for knowledge workers. So I remember from pre-call you mentioned that the tools like Claude Code or even Claude Cowork are for power users. So what do you think makes the accessibility cap so hard to close, and how does Luo approach it? You mentioned interviews. I think that's a good approach.
It is a really good question, and of course, running a venture-backed startup, unshockingly, it's a question I've had to answer in multiple fundraising conversations as well, because Anthropic is a massively big company with incredible amounts of funding and staggering growth. I wish I were them. Except reading the news lately, I'm not sure about that after all, but it must be a stressful position. But the reality is that look, Claude Coworker and Claude Code have done so much that I could almost make the cliche of standing on the shoulder of giants here and so forth. But our belief is that a huge part of success in this market of really bringing agentic execution and AI tools to knowledge work at large is so much more about the user experience, the onboarding, the help, the support, the ease of use than really anything else. It is about thinking about the outcomes. And I do think Claude Coworker and Claude Code, they're amazing tools. We use Claude Code, for example, at Luo extensively. I use Claude Cowork every now and then for some things, but for us, it really comes down into how do we take people through the first step? How do we build them not only the idea of what they can do, but the infrastructure where they can run it, where they can turn off their computer, they can go do other things. And I know Claude is starting to do those things for both for Claude Code and Claude Cowork. Our focus is then really on the ease of use and almost making it softer. We don't focus that much on having all the same capabilities and tools. We focus much more on packaging those up first for better for certain use cases and then expanding. So instead of getting a incredibly expensive power tool, you kind of get the do-it-yourself kit that you can build, kind of like IKEA furniture. So I would say we're IKEA furniture. I'll probably come to regret that later. Whereas Claude Code is the set of power tools and 2x4s.
Okay, so with your IKEA furniture, what's the first thing you think people, knowledge workers, should like be the first experience like to get into agentic AI?
Yeah, so it's something also that we've spent a lot of time thinking and pushing our customers toward is that we believe that the correct path, if there ever is one, in getting your foot in the door to do AI stuff is to automate something. It's like no matter what it is, you should automate a task. And we do that for a couple of things. One is automating a task requires you to figure out how do you need to think about this differently to complete that. But the second is that automation in knowledge work is the key, and not because we're going to replace all workers, but for you as a knowledge worker, how do I get more done? Because I think as an industry, we're struggling a little bit to measure the impact of AI right now, and different kinds of metrics are thrown around. Companies struggle overall to think about how they should be measuring it. And my personal thesis right now is, as an individual in knowledge work, you should think about AI in hours worked. Not hours worked as you putting in the hours and skipping family dinners because you're still at the office. Rather, how many hours can AI work on your behalf? And the only way to get there is to automate something, because that's the only way to get work done while you're not at the keyboard. So Claude Codes and coworkers are great at, when you're at the keyboard, to get you to be more productive. But how do you get to the point where hands off keyboard, your work still continues? So suddenly you're finding yourself in a situation where you're getting 80 hours of work done in a week, but you're only working 40 hours as a human being. That's how I think we should be thinking about it. And the only way to get there is figure out, how do you automate the first thing that saves you an hour a week? And the next week you do it again and again. Then you chain them together and then it changes.
Yeah, I was just going to ask like how we measure what is good agentic approach, but that was good. Like how many hours it saves us?
I mean, it saves us or creates for us.
Yeah.
And I think the saving for us is hard for a couple of reasons, because like when building a business, let's face it, nobody wants to sell savings because nobody wants to buy savings. They want to buy more. They want to buy more productivity, more outcome, more.
I think one thing that seems to be trending among a lot of SaaS companies is that everybody's moving from reactive to proactive sort of agents. And I think this is something that you are speaking about as well. So sort of automating your work is not only creating these sort of automated processes, but something that works while you are not on the keyboard.
Yes.
And this proactive thing is something that is actually saving time, but it's also most likely to produce something new, something more. How do you see, like, where are we going with this sort of automated open close proactive agents, stuff like that? What do you see is the like big opportunities that are opening up there?
I mean, the proactive agents are the only thing that truly make it valuable in the long term, but I'd argue it's going to take us a while for us to really get there, because the reality is that a lot of people may not have more for them to do. It's like, for example, we've spoken a lot about this sales agent concept and spoken to numerous companies on the topic. And there's a McKinsey survey that says that in most sales organizations, actual sales only takes up 30% of the time that a salesperson uses on a weekly basis. So, of course, you'd go to that and think of a way for agents to reduce the 70%, which you can very much do. There's a lot of admin work there. But I'd argue that many organizations doing that would still notice that no further sales is actually happening, because it's not necessarily that only 30% of time goes into sales because everything else takes up the time. Rather, they are unable to create more sales. You now don't have the necessary pipeline to be able to do more with the personnel you have. So we need to figure out, how do we across the stack get more effective and productive? Like, this is why there are so many new companies who are saying that they are building the AI revenue stack, which is the full thing to make things productive. But that mindset shift is going to take time. And it is not necessarily the technology, it's just humans starting to understand, how do we actually make this happen? And there's going to be an overall upskilling needed across the whole of knowledge work that goes from how do I do my work to what you said before, as well as like, how do I describe my work? Because if you can't describe your work, then you can't get an agent to do it. But that is really goes back to what I said as well. That's how you create more hours, is when something works for you, even if you as a human aren't actively working at that moment.
Yeah. One thing that I want to talk about is this balance between like having these guardrails in place, and also the fact that a lot of AI agents work best when you give them like a sandbox and a CLI tool, like go ahead and use code to, fulfill the task, much like how cloud skills work at this point. So how do you see, how can we, how do you at Luo balance this, and what sort of things we need to build so we can actually trust the process? Because this is a trust building exercise. And if you give an agent free roaming rights to just, code and accomplish stuff as you see it, like the OpenClaw example is, I think, quite interesting, because a lot of stuff happened there and people gave it some accesses that they shouldn't have. And it's an interesting example. So,
yeah, and I don't think we honestly exactly know what the balance is going to be, or we know what the balance we might want it to be, but we don't know necessarily how to get there. And this solve the problem for yourself is a interesting approach, and we see it too already. Sometimes it surprises us. Like, the most surprising thing I saw just a week ago was an email from Roy, our sales agent, telling me that a email it sent had bounced. However, the email contained the name of the person who's taking over the role. So it told me that it's going to update the CRM when we should be now reaching out to that person instead and remove the old contact from the list. I was like, yes, you should have actually done that. And I also appreciate looping me in and not just doing it. But it stopped me to think. I was like, did I instruct it to do that? Then the answer was no. But I also did not give constraints that would have said, like, don't do that. Now, the right code to solve your own problems, that's a more complex one, because the challenge we see still right now is that AI tends to sometimes go down a rabbit hole. And the longer a agent runs, we run into the situation that the task execution context just grows. And of course, there's things we can solve with sub-agents, with separate context and things like that. But at the end of the day, we're still going to be in this problem that the context might get too big and then the agent gets confused. And the most glaring example of this was Meta's researcher gave access to OpenClaw to her email to analyze of what should be saved and what not. And there was so much email that the context got flooded, got compacted, which is taking the context and summarizing it. And that compaction removed the instructions where she had said, and please confirm with me before deleting anything. So that got a funny story that started making numbers on social media. And I went like, oh, that is scary. So we have to still figure out what that looks like and what are the tools we should be giving it. So I do have this mindset of more principle of least privilege first. We more like to approach it in a way that we give the impression that you're unbounded, and when you don't find the tools, tell us what you would have needed. So it becomes an iterative approach, because that way we can then validate what the decision should have been before it actually makes the decision and runs with it.
We're nearing the end. Actually, two questions. I'm curious. Two things. Where do you personally use agents right now outside of coding? And another thing, what inspires you most right now in AI?
Where I use agents the most is handling my calendar and my emails. I am what could be described as a scatterbrained person, to put it mildly. My wife sometimes hates that, but you probably get the point. So for me, it is about knowing where I need to be, what I need to do, and then automating tasks like, oh, hey, Luo, I need to move that meeting. Can you please communicate and find a new spot? Feel free to handle the replies, yada, yada, yada. What's on my calendar? What should I know about what's on my calendar today? So it is very much a personal assistant or an executive assistant for me, because that's what I really need. And for me, I've dubbed my workspace second brain, honestly. So I'm slowly building all these things that really just help me operationally, because building a startup is kind of chaotic, and combining that with being a little scatterbrained is not always the best outcome. So for me, it is about all of that. And why I also want to focus on building that is that really the technology exists out there. It is just about how we need to manifest it right now. And this is why I also want us to introduce the voice control as quickly as possible, because I want to put on headphones and go walk my dogs and talk to my executive assistants while I do that. And really, that's what I want to happen. It's also like what inspires me the most. And that's an interesting question, because sometimes my thoughts on this industry go from, wow, this is so cool, to, maybe we should take a break and think about where we're headed. So I think it's this awe-inspired nervousness that I feel overall about all of these things that are happening right now. It's a weird world out there right now, and we don't know where we're going. One of the things that I look towards and want to actually see more is more of this happening in Europe. Like, so many people don't know about a company called Mistral. It's a French company that builds an LLM, and it's actually pretty good. And we need more of these. And I think this is something that I hope to see more of, because that's what I want to be inspired by. These people building these things out of Europe. Like Lovable is a great example to be inspired by their growth, the incredible work that they're doing. I want more of that.
Yeah. Any decision makers listening in, please funnel money to you AI projects.
I think that's a good way to end this discussion. Thank you very much, Tuomas, for coming.
Thank
And
you.
thanks
This
for
was
the
so much
listeners.
fun. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.